Welcome to the Nuanced podcast, where wisdom is power is more than just a motto.
It's our way of life. While we don't claim to have all the answers, we're dedicated to delving deeper into different topics through meaningful conversations. As a duo, we bring different viewpoints to the table, enriching our joint journey towards growth and poise.
Join us as we explore and unlearn to relearn while striving to navigate life with poise.
You know, for a long time, well, there was a portion of my life, I should say, that I started to believe that love was a fairy tale.
This was before me though, right?
This was during you.
Wow.
But the good news is, it wasn't directly related to you, but you showed me otherwise.
Oh, okay.
And I've shared this story with you before, but you know me, I grew up and I had a life of giving, whether that's with my family or in ministry or school, whatever it is. I felt like I was always giving and not necessarily receiving.
Okay.
And when I did receive, it was with purpose. Meaning, you know, maybe it could have been a birthday or I did someone a favor and they were kind of saying thank you.
They wanted to return the favor.
They wanted to return the favor. But, well, the thing that happened that really changed my perspective is we were in LIC and you literally gave me a card with a handwritten note saying how much you love me and appreciate me. And you also gave me a nice gold watch. It's still my favorite watch to this day. But I remember that moment, it really hit me hard because I think it was one of the first times that someone did something for me just because. And it was at that moment that I started to realize or believe that love wasn't a fairy tale. But I had to learn at the same time that there are different interpretations of love.
Right.
And the way you show love and receive love, it really determines on how you perceive or interpret love itself. I was looking up a few things, you know, what people see the definition of love as, how they define love. And then I had to stop and ask myself, what does love even look like?
It looks differently for every person. Everyone loves differently and everyone receives love differently. It really depends on what makes you feel appreciated, in my opinion. So the way I feel love the most is not going to be the same way the next person feels loved. It really depends on our upbringing, our character, or the things that naturally just make us feel cared for. You know, how you illustrate love and how you receive love is always going to be depending on that particular person.
That is a good point, but here is where I'm not going to lie, I'm still a little confused myself, is what's the difference then between love, care, and admiration? Because if you care for someone, you're naturally going to do things that may be shown as the image of love. You know, like I said.
Not all the time, though.
Yeah, not all the time.
Yeah.
But I think myself, and I'm sure a lot of people who are listening would have the same question, is how do you determine whether you love someone, whether you care about them, or whether you admire them? So I would love to know, how do you interpret the differences between love, care, and admiration?
In my opinion, I feel like love and care, they work together, but they're not the same. So care, meaning I care about you. I care about your well-being. I want to see good things for you, but that doesn't mean that I'm going to illustrate love towards you. Love, in my opinion, is more so, the care that I have for you is not depending on how you treat me or what you do, right? We hear this all the time. There's a lot of people who are in toxic relationships, but they love this person. That to me is love. It's not healthy love in all cases, but love, in my opinion, it's not depending on what you give me or what you do for me. It's more so, these are my emotions towards you. I love the core of you. Whereas care, I can care for someone and not necessarily love them.
What does that look like, though?
I mean, I can't really describe how it looks like, but there are many people that like I care about them. If I was to hear something was to happen to them, it would, it would affect me to some extent. But would I go as far as saying, I love you? No. I care about you. I want to see great things for you. I want to see you excel. I wouldn't wish any harm towards you. That's me caring for you. But I wouldn't describe that as love. Love is deeper than that. Love is, I care for those people most of the time because of how they treat me, or,
Right.
Or if they're a nice person. It's easy to care for someone who's always nice, treating you well. Love, in my opinion, has care within it, but I care for you despite those things. I care for you despite how you treat me. I love the core of who you are. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. And it's funny you mentioned that because I saw that there was a Pew research done in 2013, which was a while ago, but 14% of people, when they were asked what is love, said love is sacrifice.
I agree with that.
I agree with that to some extent as well, because when I thought about the way growing up, how I showed love, it was predominantly through sacrifice.
Okay.
Like I could think of several times where, for example, growing up and times were tough, I would overhear, and then eventually my parents would tell me, my siblings would get a certain amount of money for Christmas, but I would get less because I'll understand. And naturally, of course, I love my parents.
Yeah.
So I sacrificed,
your desires,
my desires, so I wouldn't make them feel bad. And it's the same thing with, I think, just everyday life where you go and you sacrifice, whether it's your emotions, whether it's keeping quiet. You were listening to something earlier that said
about peace.
That said they were taught that
peace is keeping quiet.
Peace is keeping quiet.
But whose peace is it keeping?
Right. Yeah. And in a sense, that's a sacrifice where you're putting others before yourself. But then it goes back to what I mentioned earlier about how I felt for a long time that I was giving love, but not receiving love. And I was always sacrificing, but no one really made a sacrifice for me.
And that's what's interesting about illustrating versus like receiving love, because you don't think you were receiving love. But what's funny is the people who are surrounding you probably thought they were illustrating love towards you. So it's being aware of how you prefer to be loved, but also being wise enough to realize that not everyone is going to love the way that you love.
Yeah.
So while it may not have felt that way that you were receiving love, I'm pretty sure your family members would be like, no, I did this and I did that.
That's a good point.
You know what I mean? I illustrated love in many different ways. Like your mom might illustrate it in time.
Right.
She spent a lot of time with you. Like you even told me that's what drew you close to your mom, is because she would share some secrets with you. And sometimes like when she was cooking, you went to the kitchen and you just stayed with her to have conversation. And in those conversations, she shared some information with you that to her, she may be thinking, I'm spending quality time with my son and I'm pouring my heart out to him.
Right.
Yeah, this is my understanding child. So I don't need to give him as much money as I give the others, but I'm also sharing information with him that I may not have shared with the others.
Right.
So it's having that knowledge to realize that while you're not receiving the love the way that you crave it, that doesn't mean that the person is not illustrating love towards you. Because that's something I personally have dealt with, I think up until like 2 years ago, to be honest with you. I'm still learning about it. Where for a long time I was like, the people in my life don't love me. I was like, they don't love me. And I had to really like look outside of my perimeter and view things from other people's perspective. And I started to realize that no, they were illustrating love to me. It just wasn't the way that I preferred to be loved. Because for me, quality time is important to me. So if I don't see a friend or family member for like 2 years, in my mind, bruh, are we even related? Are we friends? Like that's the mindset that I have, because I sacrifice my time to see the people that I care about. So when I don't see you for a long time, I don't speak to you for a long time, it's just like, I don't even think we have this relationship anymore, And I had to realize that that's not the case. And it's actually it's unhealthy. All of these people in my life were thinking like, I thought our relationship was different, but I guess not. They would illustrate love in different ways, whatever that may look like to them. But that's the importance of having conversations with loved ones so they understand how you prefer to be loved and you understand how they illustrate love. So that way, even if they're not giving you your preferred love, but you know that this is how they love.
Right.
So now when a person just like texts me, even if I haven't seen the person in like forever, now I value that a little bit more because I'm like, that's how that person is illustrating their love towards me. They care enough to take time out of their day. It all goes back to time to take time out of their day to check up on me. So I think that's a good way to look at it. Try to understand other people's perspectives.
You actually said something that was really interesting just now, that your love language is essentially time.
Yes.
So while you will value face-to-face time, you learn to appreciate the small ways people give you their time, whether it's a phone call, a text message, or whatever that might be. But what about the people who, for example, have a different way that they need love and they're just not getting that? Because one of the hardest things I think about love in general is, how do you separate the emotion from logic? Because love, as I think a lot of people would define it, is an emotion.
It is an emotion.
It's a
if you
feeling.
Look it up, it's a deep emotion,
but
like of affection.
One of the things that I had to learn is that sometimes, as you just mentioned, you have to literally step out of yourself and remind yourself that everyone loves a different way. So although you may not feel love, that's different than not being loved.
Right.
But how do you separate that?
Well, I think with people in your life who are like that you're closest to, a conversation needs to be had. Like we've had that conversation in the past, right? Like for some people, like, yeah, I'm not going to have a deep conversation with you every single time. But like, I don't feel like you're showing me love the way I want to be loved. No, you're not going to get that from everyone. But obviously there are certain relationships, like spousal relationships and relationship with your children or parents or siblings. Those tend to be like closer relationships where in order for the relationship to last and grow, that conversation, in my opinion, is necessary. So for me, there's certain people in my life where I'm like, how I feel about time. Like that's the thing with you. I think I mentioned it, like 2 months ago, where I was like, do you feel like we spend quality time together? And you were looking at me like, yeah.
We're with each other every day.
Every day, all day. And that's the thing, because you were looking at it like, okay, when I finish work, we're all together. And then when the baby goes to bed, you and I are together. And I was like, okay, but think about, what are we doing when we're together? When we have that time when it's just you and I, what are we really doing? Or what have we been doing the past couple weeks? Because it was only like a few weeks.
Right.
But for me, my cup is empty at that point, and you interpret it as we're spending time together because we're both next to each other. And I'm like, no, we were both on our phones. Although, at that time it was like a grind season where we were trying to like get things done. So that was understandable. And that's what I was telling myself. But I was like, even in those type of seasons, quality time is necessary. And I remember telling you, but what are we doing though? And you responded to me. He was like, okay, maybe you're right. You started realizing that we were on our phones. One of us is on a laptop. The other one's doing this, or you know what I mean? We weren't actually having quality time.
Right.
Although we were next to each other, we weren't present with each other. So I feel like with people who are important to you to that level, because there's levels to relationships, right? So if it's like a significant other, then you need to have a conversation, because you can't keep on going forward in life saying, well, this is how they show love, so that's how I'm going to receive it. Yeah, there are times for that, but you also have to mention how you would prefer to be loved. So I think a conversation is always necessary.
I could certainly see that point. That's something I actually learned from you, because again, I grew up in a background where we didn't necessarily have conversations like that. It was all based off of assumption. So I definitely agree that a conversation is needed. A conversation is certainly needed to understand how people expect to be loved or expect to be shown love.
Yeah.
And one thing that I find really interesting about that is, again, going back to the love being an emotion thing, how a lot of relationships, and not just like spousal relationships, but just, it could be siblings, it could be friends, relatives, whatever it might be. A lot of relationships carry on because people have that emotional feeling at times. So we've seen that it's a joke around the Black community where Black people, they may not see each each other for a long time, but they get together, they
It's
love
all
each
love,
other, and
yeah.
then guess what? They're trying to make plans that day
Right.
for the next time, and it
Right.
kind of just all falls out,
Yeah.
you know? And I think that's because they're always going back to that emotion of love. But in your opinion, what does love look like without the emotional part?
That's hard to answer, I feel like, because I feel like a large part of love is the emotion. The emotion then it triggers you to take action. It triggers you to have certain thoughts. So I feel like removing the emotion from love just doesn't make sense to me. I can't imagine without the emotion. Maybe I'm not understanding the question.
The reason why I ask again, there are times where you won't feel love, but you are loved.
Right.
That's the emotional part, saying like right now at this moment, I don't feel love because someone let me down, whatever it might be. And part of the Pew research from 2013, people define love as commitment, happiness, which is an emotion, security, and sacrifice. So I found that commitment is not necessarily an emotion.
Interesting.
I also find that security, providing security,
is not
emotional as well. So, and lastly, sacrifice, which is not necessarily an emotion.
Yeah, it's not. That's true.
But the reason why I'm bringing this up
I did
is because
misunderstand your question, because that makes a lot of sense. But go ahead.
The reason why I'm bringing it up is because I think it is important to be able to define what love is to you without the emotional part. Because then, when you are feeling emotional, you could remind yourself of what that love is. Right. And this is another study about the definition of love from 2011 by the Elon University poll. And it actually showed that 29% of people defined love as caring about someone else more than yourself. What do you think about that? So that's a two-part question.
I think that's how I love. Which is, it's not healthy though. I'm learning that now, that I have to make myself a priority, but that's how I've always loved. I can see why people say that, and why people think it, but it isn't healthy.
So you don't think that should be a correct definition of love?
No, I don't think you should love people more than you love yourself, but I understand that there are certain instances where you naturally will. Your children, right? You will naturally love them more than you love yourself. But what I'm trying to say is, if it's pertaining to the way I used to do it, no, it's not healthy. I loved everyone more than I loved myself. So that means if I had something going on and I heard someone else had something going on, mines were irrelevant. I dropped it and handled the person's before I handled mine. But that's not a healthy way to love, right? You got to put your oxygen mask on first, and then you can help someone else. So I just don't agree with that statement anymore. I understand it.
Yeah.
I'm still learning, because in certain relationships, like, I've learned to like distance myself in order to put myself first, because I know how I am, that if I hear like a loved one is going through something, I will drive hours. You know that. I would drive out, I would get on a plane. It's not healthy. So naturally, you have to learn to love yourself first and more before you can adequately love someone else, in my opinion.
But do you think it's unhealthy because it may not be reciprocated, or it may not be?
No, I think it's unhealthy.
Just in general.
Yeah.
Because I kind of do agree that I would also define love as loving someone else more than yourself. But I do totally agree with what you're saying, that to some extent it is unhealthy. Unhealthy because it could be a one-way street. For example, let's say one thing that could define a couple as being long-term is if each person has the other's best interests.
Absolutely.
So
you don't need to love them more than you love yourself to do that. You see what I'm saying? Because I think that's actually what worked for us. I think you are similar to me, where you love others more than you love yourself. So naturally we met each other and it was like, oh, cool. I'm gonna love you more than you love you. You're gonna love me more than I love me. It sounds great until you realize it's not. It's only it's only great if both parties are on the same page.
Yeah.
So because we love the same that way, it works for us. But can you imagine if I wasn't like that?
Yeah.
So I don't think it's healthy to be that way. But I do understand that naturally some people are that way. I'm still working on that, but I don't find it to be healthy. I think you have to learn to love yourself more. And when you do learn to love yourself more, you will love others appropriately.
I love that. And I kind of see it as a spectrum as well, where I think sometimes people define love as, I'm willing to do this for you, so I love you. And other people might define it as,
the case too.
You're always willing to do this for me, so you love me. There are moments or times in life where it may be 70% one way, 30% 50% the other way. It may be 50-50. It may be 90-10. It may be 100-0. So I had to understand and learn that love works that way, where it's not always a one-way street, or it shouldn't always be a one-way street.
It's give and take.
Yeah. I was also thinking about how a few social dilemmas or common dilemmas that people experience based off of love, and when I say people, I'm including myself, of course, is that people often feel like they have to give more love than they receive, or not have to, but people often feel like they do. And it could be a perception thing, because there have been so many times in my life where I heard both sides of the story, and both sides are explaining how much they do for the other, and the other doesn't do for them, the counterpart. So it kind of showed me how, okay, people naturally remember what they do for others and not necessarily what others
do for them.
Yeah, others do for them. Going back again to the feeling of being loved at the moment, I think one of the common misconceptions with that is a lot of people have those thoughts when they're frustrated. Because I know myself, I had those thoughts before where I'm feeling frustrated, or maybe I'm feeling a bit lonely, and I'm going through all the scenarios where people let me down. I remember this happened, I remember that happened, and because I'm feeling that negative emotion, I'm not thinking about all the times people didn't let me down. So what are your thoughts on the perception that people typically feel like they do more for others than people do for themselves?
It goes back to putting yourself in other people's perspectives. But I understand what you're saying. Like in the moment of frustration or being let down, naturally the emotions take over, right? And again, that's something that has been an issue for me in the past too. I mean, with reason though, I'm not going to lie. There are times it is with reason, but then there are times where it's just like, okay, Ruth, you're bugging. You know, it's interesting because earlier you said, how do you separate the emotion from the logic?
Yeah.
And now I feel like that makes a lot more sense now that you're asking me that question, because in a moment like that, you kind of have to be logical. You have to be logical and think, okay, I'm feeling this now, but put yourself in the person's shoes. Is that the person's intention? And most times it's not. I mean, there are cases where it is, you know, if you're in like a toxic relationship or a bad, you know, friendship or family member, whatever the case is. But if the person truly loves you, most times that's not the case. They're not intentionally doing something to make you feel that way. So clearly you're being triggered.
Yeah.
Based on past experiences or past thoughts or whatever the case is, that's causing you to feel what you're feeling in the moment. So in situations like that, I feel like you kind of have to like talk to yourself a little bit and be like, okay, am I bugging out, or is this legit? Maybe getting another voice of reason, discussing it with someone who knows the core of who you are. In my case, I would discuss something like that with you and be like, okay, tell me if I'm being drastic about this or if this is kind of messed up. You know what I mean? And understanding, because sometimes people do things where it makes us feel like we're not loved by them. But again, it's not their intention. So you kind of have to replay like what other times they've illustrated love to you. When have they kept a commitment? When have they made a sacrifice? When have they spoken positive words into your life in a hard time? Like focusing on those things rather than that current situation, and realizing like the person does love you. They just didn't make a right decision in that moment, or their decision could have been right for them and it's just not right for you. So putting yourself in the person's shoes and realizing that everyone is, one, doing what works best for them, and then two, everyone illustrates love differently. So I think it's going back to that logic, like you said.
I've seen a lot of relationships destroyed, and again, I'm not just talking about couples, but just mother, daughter, father, son, you know, family, friends, based off of this one thought that the feeling of love should never go away. And it could be because of the media. Like we've seen people that way as well, where they show if you're in love or you feel love, that feeling should be constant. You know, you wake up and it's there. You go to sleep and it's there.
Look at her.
It's like, oh, look at her. Or just knowing, for example, like I think a lot of people go through hard times within relationships, and because of a certain argument or a certain event, they automatically think the love is not there anymore.
Yeah, I think it is the times. And I think it's a lack of understanding of what love really is, to be honest with you. Because we've had conversations about what we think love is. And even our definition was like a little different. It's different for everyone, I assume. And I feel like right now people mistake love for many different words. Just because you care for someone, that doesn't necessarily mean you love them. You can care for someone and not love them. And I also feel like people expect to like someone all the time. You can love someone and you're not going to like them all the time. You're going to have arguments. You're going to have disagreements. There's going to be moments where you look at them and you're like, I don't like who you are right now, but that doesn't mean you don't love them. And that's why, to me, I always say, like, love is not conditioned to how you treat me. If there's two people in a relationship, one of them is constantly doing something that is disrespectful to the relationship and to their commitment to that person. The person who's being mistreated, if they decide to walk away, that doesn't mean that they don't love the person. They just decided to stop taking the mistreatment. But you can still love that person and not allow them to love you the way that they choose to. So I feel like people often think that you're going to like the person all the time. And if you stop liking them, that means you stop loving them. That's not the case. If you truly did love the person, even in their ugliest days, and I'm not even talking externally, like internally, because we all have like baggage, right? So even in their ugliest days, you may not like who they are in that moment, but if you truly love them, that's not going to change because of those moments.
Right.
You know what I mean? So I feel like society now don't really know what love is, to be honest with you. And it could be, movies and the social media and, the fake illustration of love that we see on a regular basis now. I don't think we know what it is.
In your opinion, how would you define love then? If you're able to separate love and like and love with all these other emotions, what does the emotionless part of love look like to you?
Love to me is seeing the core of the person, seeing the ugliest side of them and choosing to build with them anyway. Because it is a deep affection, right? Like it's an affection, of course. But when I think of like, okay, I love you. And I think I told you this before where I'm like, love low key is unconditional if it's done right.
I love that.
But I do feel like, because we're human, right? So as humans, a lot of times we don't realize the ego that comes into play or the selfishness that comes into play. But if love is done right, in my opinion, it is truly unconditional. Now, when I say unconditional, I don't want people to think like he beating your ass, you staying. you getting, cheating on, you staying. He's not providing and protecting, you staying. He's disrespecting you, you stay. No, like I said earlier, you cannot like someone and still love them. Like there are many people that like I don't communicate with anymore, that like we fell off, we grew apart, whatever the case may be. That doesn't mean I don't love you anymore. It's just we no longer serve a purpose in each other's lives. So I feel like love is that, but when you do it right, it's not conditional.
I see what you're saying.
Do you? I want to make sure I'm making sense.
Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I'm seeing the ugliest parts of you and choosing to see the beauty in you anyway.
Yeah, I love that definition. I wish I actually said that myself. But would you say that love is work?
Yes, not necessarily it is work, but you're going to have to put in work in a relationship when you love someone, because if you don't work, it won't work. You know what I mean? Like in any relationship, I feel like you have to put in the work. And if you don't, that's when you'll notice that people fall off or you have misunderstandings and communicating is not working out. And, eventually it just doesn't work out. I feel like, yes, absolutely. In love, there must be work.
That's a conversation we've had several times before, where one thing that I appreciate about you that I did the complete opposite was you purposely built on relationships. And I had to learn that from watching you, how if you want to grow in love with someone, you have to make the time. You have to put in the effort and the energy out there, instead of another common misconception about love is love just happens. Love doesn't, in my opinion, love doesn't just happen. Love is like a plant that you have to water, you have to take care of, you have to make it grow. I don't see love as something that just out of nowhere, like the media may show you,
like
love at first sight.
And it's like, oh no, it's
I love you for the rest of my life. Yeah.
You infatuated. That's what that is.
I over the years, I've learned to see love as being something that you have to grow and maintain yourself, or it's eventually going to fade away. And I think one of the current problems of society, or it could just be our times, is that people are unwilling to put
Put
in
in
the
the
work
work.
to grow that love.
Everyone
So
want quick fixes.
right,
Yeah.
they're more willing to whether it's illustrate love and they're not willing to receive it, or the other where they're always receiving love but they're not willing to illustrate it. Point is, if you're the type of person that loves to illustrate love, you have to make room to receive love,
Absolutely.
or
That's
else
something I learned like
yeah.
5 years ago.
If you're someone who naturally likes to show love, then you have to start making conscious decisions to receive love, or else you're going to be drained, and the entire relationship is going to be drained because you're going to have the mentality of I'm always doing for this person, and the person's going to have a mentality of I'm always trying to do for this person, and then you
You won't
both
let
just
me.
wither
Yeah,
away.
that's real.
And still vice versa, where if you're always receiving love and the other person's always giving you love, then if you're not giving that person love, they may see it as a one-way street where it's always me. I'm always the one I got to pick up the phone call, get in that car and drive, make the effort to go to whatever events it is. And you're sitting here like, maybe this person, I know this person loves me, I'm trying to, show the person I love them too, but they're not really letting me do it. So I'm just going to sit
Step
here.
down. How many times are they going to try?
Right.
Yeah.
It's definitely a two-way street.
Ooh, that felt personal.
No,
I know you didn't say it
oh, no,
personally,
yeah.
but I'm just like, it hit so hard that I felt personal because that's something, like I told you, that's something I learned like within the last 5 years where I was like, I've constantly had this feeling my whole life where I did not feel loved. And I started to just accept it. I was just like, yeah, I'm always the one that love people. Like, people don't love me. Like, they don't really love me. And you've heard me say that.
Yeah.
I felt like people never came through for me. And I had to sit back and really do a lot of self-reflection. Couple years ago, this was like before we were married, started realizing like, I don't allow people to love me. Like, I naturally, whenever someone offered something, I'm like, no, it's okay. If someone asked me how I was doing, I gave the standard, human answer that we give. Yeah, everything's good. I never opened up to allow myself to receive love, even with gifts.
Yeah.
I had to really realize that like I'm part of the problem. Like sometimes we think like it's everyone else. No, you got to take accountability.
Right.
There's part of the issue where you're allowing it to happen.
Right.
So that's so interesting that you said that, because I think that's like super duper important to be able to put yourself in a space to be able to receive love. You're going to naturally get to a point of drainage.
Right.
You're pouring into other people, but you're not letting other people pour into you.
Right.
There's no benefit that will come from that.
And it could be very uncomfortable. Just so everyone knows, this is not something where you could really expect to just wake up one day and be like, all right, I'm used to receiving love, now I'm going to try to illustrate it.
Yeah.
Or I'm used to illustrating love, now I'm just going to receive it. You have to really, I've learned that you have to really humble yourself.
Yes.
Because there are times when, if you're used to illustrating love and not receiving love, that people may try to show you love in ways that really annoy you.
Yeah.
You're an introvert and here they come throw you a surprise party.
Ooh.
Like, how do you deal with that?
This feels personal. I don't know. This was everything you're saying hitting
this
little. That is, yeah. Those are all things I've experienced where I wasn't allowing people to love me the way that they wanted to show me love, and I had to really dig deep and be like, okay, what is the problem here? And it made me start appreciating people the way they illustrate love. Like sometimes you have to recognize, okay, if this person is illustrating their love by giving you gifts all the time, that could be their love language. And that's one thing that people don't recognize. Like the way you illustrate love is often the way that you would like to receive love. Yeah, but not everyone is aware enough to recognize that in everyone else.
Right.
And that's something that I felt like I always did. Like if I knew I had someone in my life who like, they seem to value like when we spend time together, let me make the effort to spend more time with them. If it was someone like they value gifts, I'd be like, oh, when I'm going to see them, let me bring that bottle of wine that they like, or, like little things like that. But not everyone thinks that way. But once you stop to do a lot of self-reflection and become more self-aware, and also recognizing that like sometimes this has a lot to do with our childhood.
Yeah.
And the way we were brought up and how we were taught to illustrate love versus receive it. Like there are so many different factors to it to really understand your love language and the love languages of those around you. So that hit deep.
And you really will never know unless you ask, going back to conversations,
Exactly.
how people interpret your love or even expect to be loved. Because I would challenge everyone to send a few people a text message and just ask them this simple question. Tell me about a time where I really made you feel loved. And I promise you, you'll be surprised at the moments that people mention.
The things that you would never even think about.
Right. The thing that you would never really think about. And I saw this quote from Deepak Chopra, I believe his name is. Hopefully I'm pronouncing it right. He said, love is the energy which expands, opens up, sends out, stays, reveals, shares, and heals. And the reason why I love that definition so much is because it shows how love is
not a one-way street.
It's not a one-way street. It's back and forth. Sometimes it expands and opens up. Other times it sends out or stays. It reveals, it shares. You know, there's so many different components to love. And I've told myself this consistently, where I have to get into the habit of understanding what version of love I'm looking at. Is it the version that is revealing? Because I had to learn that as well, where I grew up and people would just tell me things. I didn't know why.
Right.
You know, I didn't ask to know your lifelong secrets and all that. But I had to understand that that's a form of love. You know, people just seeking your counsel or thinking like you're a good listener. Trusting me. And there may be times where people just want to be around you and sit in silence. You know, and if you're not ready to receive it, if you're taking the love of, I need to talk to you, so I'm sharing all my secrets into the situation
where
where
be around you, they just want your presence. That's a form of love.
So love sometimes may look like silence. Love may look like a conversation. Love may look like space. If you need space, I got you. You know, I'm giving your space. So I had to learn that love comes in with different faces.
Absolutely, yeah. And that's why it goes back to having the conversation and understanding who you're dealing with, having that conversation to understand how that person prefers to be loved. And what's funny is sometimes that person doesn't even know how they want to be loved. That's what I had to realize for myself too. There were times where I'm just like, well, how do I want to receive love? Obviously, yeah, quality time, but what does that look like? Because I'm also an introvert.
Yeah.
And people in my life will tell you like, yeah, she's not coming to this event. She's not trying to be around all of us right now. That doesn't mean I don't love everyone who's going to be there. It's just like, I value my me time. I value time alone. I value my quietness. So for someone who enjoys quality time, if I was just to give you that standard information, it just doesn't make sense.
Right.
I value quality time. That's my love language. But I also don't want to come to your event or come to your house right now. Like, it just doesn't add up. So having those conversations with people who you value and want to grow in love with is key. You have to understand where they're coming from, and then even observing them to pick up on what makes them feel joyful and appreciated when you do certain things, because sometimes that person is not even aware of how they want to be loved.
Right. And I would even expand on that to say, how do you illustrate love for yourself? How do you receive love for yourself? Because we've had this conversation before, like just taking a little personal, where I'll be quick to buy someone something that they need.
Right.
But for myself, I'm like, I could, this money could be better used. For someone else or something. So one thing that I've had to realize as well is it's hard to grow in love with someone else when you're not growing in love with yourself.
There's a common denominator here. Really, there's a common denominator, because we were talking about it earlier with the definition of love, like loving others more than you love yourself. You cannot love appropriately if you don't love you first. You have to find yourself and learn at the core, how are you loving you? How are you showing yourself love? Like, what makes you happy? Like, if you don't have these answers, how are you then going to provide it to someone else to love you better?
Right. Exactly.
Right.
The times where I've felt unloved, I had to first unemotionally step out of myself and ask myself a few questions, such as, why do I feel this way? Because a lot of times you'll notice that the moments where you feel like someone's not loving you the way you need to love is beyond them. It could be where you had a really bad day And so now you're requiring more love than you needed yesterday.
Yeah.
So
That's
context
true.
is everything. So I had to ask myself, why do I feel this way? What were the steps that led me to feeling this way? Did I reject love? This happens with, people living together where someone's having a bad day and someone goes in for a hug, or you try to, do something nice and
Yeah.
you immediately push that away.
Yeah.
So
Right.
now you're looking for love, but you just rejected love. And the
Right.
person that wanted to provide you with the love is thinking they don't want,
Right. They don't want
they
this.
don't want this
Yeah.
now. Lastly, when I felt unloved, I had to start making a conscious decision to start purposely illustrating love towards someone. And the reason why I started doing that is because, using the quote that I read a few moments ago, how love is an energy, I believe that not all the time, but when you're seeking love, you can draw love to you by showing love.
That's deep. I love that.
That's something that I've done before, where if I'm feeling discouraged about something, I'll try to encourage somebody else. Or if I'm feeling lonely about whatever or a situation, I try to reach out to someone else who might be feeling the same way. How many times have we been through something, even if we're still going through the same thing, somebody with less experience comes to us for advice and we give them
Yeah.
that advice, and all of a sudden
It's
we
like,
feel better.
oh,
Yeah, like
yeah. It's so
nothing
true.
changed, but
Right.
because you were sharing love, knowledge with someone, it naturally, raised that energy of love in your life. So that's the final thing that I do.
You are what you attract.
Right.
Thank you for spending your time with us. We hope you gained some knowledge today that'll promote poise in your life. We have new episodes uploaded every Thursday right here, same place, same time. Until next time, you can follow us on Instagram at Noirpoise Podcast to stay connected. That's NOIRPOISED Podcast. We'd love to hear your feedback.
And remember, your wisdom is power.